It's 4 o'clock. Let's start.
There we go.
And make it so I can see the comments, please, on here.
Yes. Hold on a second. I gotta go live. It's ripping my heart out, thinking of you, wondering how you grew so strong. I'm tearing your heart out, thinking of me, living so thoughtlessly, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. My life out of balance, survival my call, never questioning what I'm turning into, fitting in this culture, my constant goal, all the lives I undo, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. You're slipping away now, out of my grasp. I've no idea how or what I've done. I can't live without you, baby. Hubris aside, I can't breathe without you, honey. There's nowhere to hide, and soon I'll find I can't run, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. You're slipping away now, out of my grasp. I've no idea how or what I've done. I can't live without you, baby. Hubris aside, I can't breathe without you, honey. There's nowhere to hide, and soon I'll find I can't run. There you go. And you're up.
Greetings, everybody. Thanks for joining us for tonight's live stream. Special thanks to Beth, B Up, and Javier, or Xavier, for joining as members to get started this afternoon. I'm going to start with just a little bit of an introduction to 3 different topics while waiting for your thousands of questions to roll in and comments. First of all, please take a look at the diminishing Arctic sea ice. I think Pauline can put up a graphic there.
Yep.
And I would point you to my latest paper in the peer-reviewed journal Earth and Environmental Science Research and Reviews, published earlier this year, in which I write, old ice constituted only 1.2% of the ice extent in March of 2019, and first-year ice now dominates the sea ice cover. In summary, and then I quote NOAA's 2019 Arctic Report Card, quote, "The Arctic sea ice cover has transformed from an older, thicker, and stronger ice mass in the 1980s to a younger, thinner, more fragile ice mass in recent years." And in this paper, I point out the importance of conservation biology in understanding topics such as the rapid rate of change. From the 1980s to 2019 is almost no time at all in the evolutionary perspective, or from the evolutionary perspective of various species. All right, second topic. The third wave of the pandemic has begun. I've mentioned several times that pandemics tend to have three waves. I didn't even know there was a second wave that's already behind us. And I don't think I saw any corporate media outlets indicating that there was a second wave, but here we are from The Atlantic from October 15th, 2020, so just 2 days ago. The Atlantic reports via headline, "The third coronavirus surge has arrived." And sure enough, I think Pauline can put up a figure here indicating the three waves. These are the United States daily confirmed coronavirus increases. You can see that the first wave was characterized by more than 30,000 cases. This is in the United States alone, more than 4,500 deaths. Second wave had many more cases and many more deaths. That's the wave that I didn't hear anything about. And the third wave is just getting started. Presumably the second wave had more cases as expected, but fewer deaths, which was unexpected, at least to me. Fewer deaths apparently due to social distancing and face coverings. So that's the good news coming from the United States in particular, since the United States is characterized by poor leadership and not so swift people. I can say that because I'm from the United States, so I'm one of the not so swift people. Here's a headline from today at CBS News. U.S. reports over 69,000 new COVID-19 cases, the most in a single day since July. July was in the midst of the second wave. So it's an interesting headline from CBS News. And again from from today in Reuters, global coronavirus cases rose by more than 400,000 for the first time late on Friday, a record one-day increase. And this is interesting. I would have expected better behavior from the people across the pond, but the story goes on. Europe has emerged as the new coronavirus epicenter and is reporting on average 140,000 cases a day over the past week. That's pretty impressive. To outdo the United States on the level of poor leadership and abject idiocy, that's doing something. Good job, Europe. And then the third thing I want to talk about, very briefly, and maybe the questions have started to roll in, or the comments, was that of ethics. And ethics in particular with respect to communicating honestly, meaning fully and honestly. See, for example, yesterday's morning video. I mentioned the Washington Post in the headline about methane. In particular, methane was increasing despite the economic slowdown, according to the Washington Post. Well, surely what they really meant was because of the economic slowdown. Once you understand the aerosol masking effect, as I'm sure folks at the Washington Post know, the economic slowdown would be expected to increase atmospheric methane as a result of increased heating of the earth. So that's a classic example of lying by omission. Kind of reminds me of a certain climate scientist at Penn State University. We'll just call him the Lion Man for reference. If you're interested in something to read, something to influence your own emotional response to habitat disappearing for human animals on Earth, then I would recommend Camus and Kafka and more recently Kurt Vonnegut as masters of dark humor in light of catastrophic situations, in light of existential threat to our species, in fact. So those are good places to start if you're interested in the take of intelligent people on existential threats. A great quote from Camus, it goes something like, "Shall I eat breakfast or shall I commit suicide?" So the constant question in his mind and the likes of other existential and even pragmatic philosophers like William James from the United States, who constantly wondered if it was worth living another day. And for me, it has been pretty much all the days so far. I've experienced indifference about my continued survival, but not anymore. So, for what that's worth. Let's see. Good question, Beth. Number one, how the heck are you? And second, in your opinion, when will the Arctic sea ice be gone? I'm stunned we lasted this long. You know, that from the peer-reviewed journal community, the most conservative of the peer-reviewed journals are the annual reviews. So these are published once a year, and there's quite a large series of them now. But the one from the Annual Review of Earth and Planetary Sciences, published in 2012, has a paper by Wisław Masłowski and colleagues that I've cited a few times, indicating that they projected an ice-free Arctic in 2016 plus or minus 3 years. Well, here we are 2020. It didn't happen in that 7-year period. It didn't happen this year. So I'd say we've dodged 8 bullets so far. I think we're beginning to see some of the signs of an ice-free Arctic, even in the absence of an ice-free Arctic. So even though there is thin ice dominated by new ice, I still think we're beginning to see methane releases, atmospheric methane levels that we would expect with an ice-free Arctic. And in addition, it's hard to distinguish between the economic slowdown and other potential sources of increased heating. Is it loss of albedo from the Arctic Ocean that's causing subsequent overheating that has taken us above 2C already, above the 1750 baseline? Or is it other factors? It's a little hard to say, but the Arctic ice and the diminishing of Arctic ice might well be contributing to that factor as well. Let's see. Oh, and you ask how I am. I'm actually doing great. How the heck are you? I'm, surprisingly, and as I've already indicated, there was a time in my life when I was indifferent about my continued survival. But I'm over that now, and now I greatly appreciate every day, and some days every hour. And I attribute that in part to my long-time study of scholars such as Camus and Kafka, and of course Vonnegut, and others who have faced dark times. I sometimes approach the world from the perspective of a Stoic, in the sense of the ancient Greek Stoics, even though Nietzsche hated them because he thought they were giving up and they weren't trying hard enough. Well, where have I heard that one before? So the Stoics in general accept what they cannot change instead of fighting back against it. And Nietzsche viewed that as giving up. And I view that as a mark of intelligence, actually, if there are things you cannot change. All right. So thanks for those questions. Why should we trust Sam Coran as a reputable source? You know, it doesn't really matter that Sam Coran remains anonymous. What matters is that he or she is quoting the refereed literature. So that's what's important to me. That's how you can tell Sam Coran is legitimate, is authentic, is in quoting the peer-reviewed literature, not just making things up out of hand. I've taken issue with a couple of things Sam Coran has written, minor things, but in the grand scheme of things, I think Sam Coran is doing great work and adheres very tightly to the peer-reviewed literature. But, you know, I can't influence who other people think is a reputable source or not. Guy is no longer indifferent, question mark. I'm no longer indifferent about my continued survival. I actually appreciate my continued survival in a way that I didn't just a few years ago, when I was in the midst of some really bad things happening in my life. A lot of people abandoning me and betraying me. And that wasn't a lot of fun. So I was kind of indifferent about my continued survival. I'm not anymore. I'm alive and doing fine, as the song goes. Where do the fish go when the water in the Arctic warms? Go north, then back south again. Orwell. That sounds about right to me. You know, habitat for all organisms on this planet is probably a one-time endeavor. Yes, there have been mass extinction events. Yes, there have been abrupt cooling and heating events, but nothing like this one. There has never been a rate of change that even comes close to the rate of change we're experiencing right now because of the Industrial Revolution. So this time actually is different than all the other times. And I would encourage you to read the open access paper in Earth and Environmental Science Research and Reviews, The Role of Conservation Biology in Understanding the Importance of Arctic Sea Ice, because it goes into some detail to describe why conservation biology can be relied upon, and therefore why conservation biologists can be relied upon to transmit information that is beyond and encompasses more than what other scientists typically report. So that might be worth taking a look at. When are you interviewing Sid Smith? We already did. Right? Yeah, we already did. So that's posted in the archives at the Nature Bats Last radio show. naturebatslast.podbean.com. So you can find it there just a few months ago. That's an interesting question, Diana. Back in the 70s, we tried to stop nukes, failed to stop them. Do you think nuclear energy, waste, etc., has contributed to abrupt climate change?
Crisis.
Only indirectly through the loss of aerosol masking for a relatively short time. In the... Do you recall what year that was?
Which year? Of what?
When France switched over to nuclear power pretty much all at one time and stopped burning coal-fired power plants.
Like 2003?
Was that 2003? Yes, that's right. Thank you. So 2003, France switched largely from burning fossil fuels to using nuclear power, and although it wasn't reported as such, I'm convinced that the loss of aerosol masking contributed to the heat wave that killed, do you remember how many people?
70,000 throughout Europe.
70,000 people, most of them in France, but throughout Europe. And so I think nuclear power has contributed to heating only by taking the pressure off of fossil fuels. I think nuclear power is set to kill and before that make miserable many people who manage to survive loss of habitat for humans, which I think is coming very soon. So I think the survivors who persist in bunkers or bunker-like situations, for example, will be quite displeased with the fact that they survived once the horrors of ionizing radiation begin to disrupt their lives. Thank you, Victoria, and thanks for joining as a member of the channel. Please feel free to post a comment or a question. Lately, I've felt so well adjusted, I'm starting to worry. That's great. It reminds me of the 3 Chinese curses. Most people are aware of one of the Chinese curses, may you live in interesting times. Got that covered. We certainly live in interesting times. The second and more dire of the Chinese curses is, may you attract the attention of the government. Hello. And the third or first, depending upon how you want to arrange them, of the Chinese curses, the worst of the Chinese curses is, may you find what you're looking for. So I think your being well adjusted might fall into that category of having found what you're looking for. So seems like a good deal now. But remember what Homer wrote some 2,100 years ago in the Iliad, any moment may be our last. And that applies certainly to us as individuals. So breathe it in, take it in. It's amazing to be alive. Or to say it like Louis C.K. would, it's amazing to be alive. All right. Do I meditate? Yes, I meditate. I don't meditate, quote, formally, nor do I meditate at a particular time of day, but usually as I'm going to sleep and having difficulty going to sleep, I meditate. Almost always by focusing on my breath and paying particular attention to the breathing in and the exhaling and what is happening to my body, and paying close attention to all of my body parts as I meditate, to take my mind off the horrors that otherwise exist there. You talking to me? Yes, I was talking to you, Don. Scott asks, Guy, how do you and Pauline manage to beat peace?
Be at peace.
Be at peace. Thanks to Pauline. Thanks to Pauline for the interpretation. I'm saying beating peace kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? Anyway, I don't know. You know, when we meet people for the first time, say we meet somebody for the first time, or we're having a conversation with somebody that we haven't talked to for a while, we very frequently bring up the fact that we don't obsess about the kinds of little things we used to in our lives. And so that probably helps. I think that we both consider ourselves quite fortunate to have made it this long and to have enjoyed the enormous privilege that comes with being white in this society and in positions of relative wealth from a financial perspective. We've been careful with the money that we do have, and that's why I can not draw a paycheck for nearly 13 years now, or nearly 12 years, whatever it is, and still take the time and have the money to buy the equipment to do have these kinds of interactions. So we're at peace, relatively speaking, and I practice meditation, as I already indicated.
I do too.
Pauline does as well. Is it a similar kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, she says it's a similar kind of approach that she takes. Okay. Generic question, how do you think life began on Earth? You know, we used to think, and this is what I learned in middle school in Weippe, Idaho, which was undoubtedly, a few decades behind most other schools in the country at that time. I learned that it arose spontaneously one time. More recently, and I would say, and it arose because of the specific environmental conditions, most notably a warm, wet planet, and then lightning to provide the energy to initiate the early life forms. And I would say that it's about 50-50 now among scholars who respond to that question between that spontaneous initiation of life on Earth and life coming from an interstellar body, like some asteroid that struck Earth and had some living material on it, and that's what caused life to begin on Earth. So I have no idea which is right, and I haven't studied that question and the evidence behind that question for a really long time. So take that for what it's worth. Hans asks, what is the most important skill for a teacher? I would say that the most important skill is patience. And I'm really getting annoyed with that question. No. Sorry about that. I think patience, because I taught a class that had the same title year after year. And after the first couple of years, you think that how could the students not get it by now? Failing to recognize that it's a completely different group of students than you taught last year and the year before that and the year before that. So of course they can't know this information. So patience is key. For most of my time in the academy, I used the Socratic approach. I would provide the information on the first day of class. I would give the URL, the website for the class, and the students then had access to all of my notes that I use for teaching. So they had everything that I have. And then on the second day of class, I would just ask questions. And of course, this would terrify them because nobody had ever done that in a college classroom before. Nobody had just started out by asking questions. They brought their pen and their paper, and they were set to scribble down my notes as I transferred them from my notepad to the board, and then they transferred them to the notebook, and nothing was going on in the minds of anybody in the whole room. That's the usual approach in college classrooms. But what I did was on the second day, I told them, okay, you have everything I have. I have this set of notes, and you have it right there in front of you now. So what do you think about X, Y, or Z? And they would look at me terrified. But by the third day of class, they were prepared. They read the papers that I expected them to read, and they were prepared to have the conversation. It took a couple of days to get there, but that was great fun, and it put the emphasis not on me as the teacher, not on them as the students, but instead where it belonged, which is on the material. The material that we were covering, the subject that we were learning about together. So patience, patience, patience. That's the key. Lyndon, I did not hear about the new billion-dollar cask-and-contain nuclear waste facility near Carlsbad, New Mexico. So I don't know if this is a waste isolation pilot plant facility, because this is the first I'm hearing about it. I think it's a great idea. Perhaps it arose from my work and quote Mark Austin paying attention to my work. Maybe, I don't know. Or maybe this is something that's been in the works for a while. Anything we can do to preserve habitat for life on Earth in our absence is a good idea. So I think Cask and Contain is perhaps the most important thing we can do as a society at this point to try to ensure that some life remains in our wake. I don't know that that'll work, by the way, because of the rapid rate of environmental change already occurring, but it's worth a try. Jimmy asks, how do you imagine the collapse of civilization will look like? You know, before the nukes melt down and after the worldwide food shortages, how long do you think we have? Months? Years? Predictions are difficult, especially about the future. I think that's what Yogi Berra said, or something like that. So, how long do we have? Not long. And I don't know what that means. I'm stunned we made it this long. Given the refreeze, or the absence thereof, of Arctic ice, I'd be stunned if we made it through next year. But on the other hand, I'm surprised that we're able to have this conversation today. I have predicted a few times that that this set of living arrangements would not be persisting today. I'd love to think we had another year. I really would. Do we have another year? Do we have another 13 months? Again, it would surprise me, and it would be a pleasant surprise. So, I don't know, but what's it going to look like? What do I think it's going to look like? I think it's going to look like in various towns and cities, municipalities throughout the country and the world, in relatively short succession, the water stopping coming through the taps, the electricity going out. And as a consequence, the inability to put gasoline into your car, the inability to take your car out into the street anyway, because you don't have gas for it, and that's not the first thing on your mind. No food on the shelves of the grocery stores once we have that disruption in fuel supply. So all of this can transpire over a very short period of time, and I suspect it will, from location to location. So say in Orange County, Florida, where I live, characterized by very poor leadership at the state level, at the national level, no relevant communications about what's coming, what's likely to happen in the near future. Poor leadership, as nearly as I can tell, at the level of the county as well. So what happens when the food stops showing up in the grocery store because there's a disruption in food supply? Say the inability not just to produce toilet paper, as happened relatively early on with this pandemic, but instead the ability to produce bread. Bread and circuses are absolutely required for every civilization. We'll have circuses until the bitter end, I can guarantee that. But we may not have bread, and once it's bread not showing up on the shelves of the stores instead of toilet paper, that's going to be a real problem. And especially when it's accompanied not just by bread, but by eggs, and that supply chain has already been broken, at least temporarily. For a while here, we couldn't get eggs at all. So what happens when we have significant food supplies, the delivery of which is disrupted? That's what I think will be an indication of our impending demise. That goes right along with loss of aerosol masking contributing to the demise of the wheat supply. I'm sorry, not the wheat, the grains. Most notably the grains that matter in the harvest this time of year: corn or maize and soybeans. So if the disruption of those basic foods is significant at the local or regional level, then I expect pretty rapidly thereafter the full-scale breakdown of things like municipal services, the ability to deliver water through the taps, the ability to have electricity, have the lights come on. And I suspect that will lead to some very untoward behavior by some of your neighbors. Now, as I mentioned several times, as I have mentioned several times, how you act and how I act is largely up to us. Let's ignore our virtual lack of complete will for now and assume that we have the ability to control our own behavior. How are you going to act when what I expect to happen happens? You might not expect it to happen in your lifetime, but what if it was? Well, so now you've received the early warning. When you see it happening around you, maybe you'll act with decency. Maybe you'll act, and other people might catch on, and they might realize, hey, it's not this guy's, it's not Guy and Pauline's fault that I don't have bread today, that I don't have food today. So maybe they won't shoot us for the remaining can of peaches we have in our stocked shelves, you know? And maybe by being a decent person yourself, you can expect some decency in return. Have you heard about Lyndon asks, have you heard about Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips' attempt to alert DOE and the New Mexico legislature geological problems at the facility in the 1980s? No. I was barely alive in the 1980s. Are you kidding? You can't pin that one on me. No, I hadn't heard about that. But I'm not surprised. I mean, look at every single disaster movie and every single disaster. They begin with a scientist warning what's coming. In fact, in real life, outside of the movies, that happens long before the disaster comes. Somebody is warned about the disaster. So I'm not at all surprised that Dr. Richard Haynes Phillips attempted to alert DOE and the New Mexico legislature to geological problems. The same thing happened at Yucca Mountain in Nevada, where even today nuclear waste is being stored in large quantities, and that's a geologically horrible place to put that material. But it's got to go somewhere, and somebody's going to lose that political match. And I'm afraid that's what happens all the time. Have you read anything with respect to global food supply? Yes. I've actually read quite a lot about the global food supply, and that's why I'm comfortable making the kinds of statements I'm making. Jimmy, do you have any pets? I had pets for pretty much my entire adult life, and I decided that was probably a bad idea when the second and final dog I had as an adult died when she was virtually exactly 17 years old. And so after that, I decided, because of what I foresee occurring in the near future, that having pets was not a very good idea. Not just because they would eat me when I stopped feeding them, but because I didn't want them to suffer. That said, I live in a house with 2 Yorkies, and occasionally I'm inclined to pet them and treat them like pets. So I guess that qualifies. They're 13 and 10 years old, father and daughter. So I live with pets. I don't have pets. They're Pauline's. But occasionally I take care of them. And I don't treat them very badly on a daily basis or anything like that. I let them out, I let them in, I take their diapers off, whatever. Have there been any indications of food shortages this year? There have been crop losses, or at least declining crop production in several places in the world, not just in the Midwestern United States, but many other places throughout the Northern Hemisphere. With the exception of minor food products during the pandemic, such as eggs were completely missing, like toilet paper, for a while. Other than that, I haven't seen any significant signs of food disruption. And now is when we would expect the grain prices to shoot up with respect to the grains that we really need to survive in this country and every other civilized country, characterized by industrial civilization, not characterized by people being civilized. And it isn't happening yet, so I view that as a very good thing. And maybe it won't happen next year, which would be another really good thing. But there are other concerns besides just the one, although that is hugely important with respect to maintaining the set of living arrangements and therefore to maintaining habitat for life on Earth. Jacinda has just won, Kevin says Jacinda Ahern has just won a landslide victory in an unpronounceable word for me, New Zealand. Do you expect a call from her asking you to be her climate change minister? Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised the phone isn't ringing right now. Surely she has my number as part of the Five Eyes network. She could get a hold of me right now. Maybe you're asking for her, Kevin? Is that what's going on here? I don't think my work is very much appreciated by the so-called powers that be, what Michael C. Rupert in his later years called the powers that were, because he recognized that things had slipped out of their hands. So, yeah, I look forward to her call. Thank you, Hans. Apples for the teacher. That's amazing, because earlier today I told Pauline, we got to get some apples. It's all tangerines and bananas here. We got to get some apples to balance things out. So, thanks, Hans. I appreciate the donation. What about the heat/floods going on near the equator in India? It's happening there already, isn't it? Yes. Although I haven't seen any news stories about a significant disruption in food supplies. So, and China has had 1,000-year floods, etc. Mainstream media will not air it, of course. And so this is what I'm looking for, is a significant number of people showing up at the grocery store and not having what they expect there, and not just toilet paper, and not just a relatively short time span of not having eggs, or Lysol wipes, or
the wrong caviar.
Right, or the caviar that I want instead of the caviar that's my second choice. Right, so I haven't seen a lot of that. So I haven't seen widespread concern about food disruption. And that surprises me, to be honest. And again, it's a pleasant surprise. Can we coalesce a community of survivors? Asked Victoria. No. No, because nobody survives. Because as little as a 5 to 6 degree global average temperature rise causes the loss of all life on Earth, according to a paper by Strona and Bradshaw published in 2018 in Scientific Reports. It's an open access publication, so you can read the whole paper about co-extinctions. And to find it, you can just go to Google Scholar, type in Strona and Bradshaw, and also type in biological annihilation. So that'll take you right to it. We depend upon many other species for our own survival. We will not be the last species alive on Earth, I guarantee it. Other species in the genus Homo have already gone extinct, some of them from climate changes, and there's never been a climate change more rapid than this one. We are not going to survive without the species we rely upon for our own survival. So, we can get together for a short time to coalesce a community of survivors, and that was an initial early effort of mine in New Mexico at a homestead I developed there. But then I became familiar with the aerosol masking effect and its likely profound impact on habitat for our species and all the others we depend upon. So then I made the transition back to, quote, civilized life, so that I can continue to have conversations such as this one. And so some people call that giving up. I call it changing my life in light of circumstances. Delana says, seems to me it will force the equator people to move north and south because the middle will be the hottest. Is that true? It's already happening. You think that people from Central America coming to the southern border of the United States are coming there because they want to go to Disneyland? No, they're not. They're coming there because they are no longer able to grow food in the place where people have been growing food literally for generations. So it's already happening at some level. However, I would not make the blanket statement that the poles are going to be fine longer than the equator, again, because of the aerosol masking effect. I suspect we're all going to go at more or less the same time. Once habitat is gone for humans, we're going to depart. And once we lose a relatively minor amount of aerosol masking, that destroys habitat for our species and for the many species we depend upon. So, there will be some movement. That movement is already underway. But when you read about migration in corporate media outlets, keep in mind that, to my knowledge, very few mainstream media outlets have admitted that the aerosol masking effect even exists. There was an episode of BBC, I think 2005, about global dimming, and it's disappeared from YouTube a few hundred times. People keep reposting it and it keeps disappearing. There are certain things that people do not want us to know, and leading among them is the aerosol masking effect. Once you learn about it, you become aware that humans will not survive significantly longer in northern Canada than they will in Ecuador. So, live now, live here now, where you're at, with the ones you're with. That's my long-time advice. We don't have long, and there is little opportunity that people will be moving toward the poles and surviving significantly longer. Is the Berkey water purification unit easy to operate? Yes, extremely easy. Can it purify water if it's coming from a non-municipal source, like a water hole stream, seawater, etc.? Is that possible? Yes. That's why we used several of them at Pauline's property in Belize. Which reminds me, if you're looking for a great place to go for the end of your days, Pauline has this great property for sale in Belize, where the official language is even English, so it's easy for most of us to get along there. In any event, the Berkey water filter is extremely easy to operate. It can purify water coming from any number of sources. We have one right here in this home that is full of water right now, and we have a few spare filters so that if we get to the point that the water supply is disrupted, we'll be able to walk 3 blocks to one of the lakes on either side of us, dip water out of the lake in a bucket, bring it back and put it into the Berkey water filter. It's easy, it's straightforward, it's even sort of fun. So I would have one of those on hand just because in these trying times, we never know when there's going to be a disruption in the municipal water supply. So I think it's a good idea to have one regardless. Was it our inevitable destiny to destroy all life on Earth, considering how greedy and short-sighted humans are? Oh, no. No, no, no. And dare I say it? No. We lived relatively peacefully without imperialism for about 315,000 years as a species, and for a couple of million years before that as humans. What went wrong? What went wrong? As has been described by many writers, probably most compellingly described by Daniel Quinn, we began to lock up the food. How did we lock up the food? By having food that could be locked up, by having food that could be stored for a relatively long period of time. Grains. Grains did it. Once the planet warmed up to a relatively cool temperature. We came out of the last ice age, 12 degrees Celsius, up to 13.5 degrees Celsius, just a degree and a half, and the temperature stabilized there for the one of only 2 or 3 times in the last 2 billion years. The temperature stabilized at this relatively cool 13.5 degrees Celsius. That's the global average. And that temperature allowed us to grow grains. In fact, to grow, to store, and to distribute grains at scale. And once you can do that with grains, you can control the people. Once you can control the grains, you can lock up the food, you can control the people. That's the definition of civilization, is locking up the food and therefore controlling the people. So we got along just fine for the first 315,000 years of our species, plus or minus 15 minutes, and also for the first couple of million years of something we would call human, and we did not lock up the food. So I don't believe it was our inevitable destiny to destroy all life on Earth. As humans, we were getting along just fine for literally millions of years without destroying all life on Earth. And then we figured out how to lock up the food. Do the wealthy know this is coming? Oh, yeah. You know, one of the ways that people become wealthy and retain their wealth is access to information. So let me give an example. In November 2012, I believe it was, I delivered my first public presentation about abrupt climate change and the near-term loss of habitat for our species on Earth. The following month, December 2012, Steve Wozniak reached out to me and told me he was going to move to the far south. And he didn't tell me where that was, but at the time I had been talking about not the aerosol masking effect because I didn't know about it yet. And I had not been talking about the catastrophic meltdown of the world's nuclear power plants. So he thought by moving further south he would extend his run, and so he moved to Tasmania shortly thereafter, the southern island state of Australia, which I should point out, the rainforests of which have been on fire for the last couple of 3 years. So that might not have been the best place to go. But yes, the wealthy know what is coming. They have access to the information that most of us do not have. And I can guarantee you that they are living accordingly. This does not mean they're going to give up any of their privilege to make the world a better place. That has never happened. These people are largely sociopaths and psychopaths. So they are not going to take advantage of this information to implement planetary hospice or to implement the MEARS project that Ye Tao is heading up at Harvard's Roland Institute. They're not going to do any of those good things. They're going to shut up about it and thereby ensure that their privilege is retained. Victoria asks, would you be willing to coalesce a community of survivors to organize growing grains, vegetable, freshwater, etc. for as long as humanely possible? I'm not sure what that means, and I tried that for nearly 10 years in New Mexico, and that led to the complete destruction of every relationship in my life. So I'm not sure that would be a wonderful idea. I don't know the good sources for monitoring food supplies, or I certainly would share that information.
People are sharing their emails. Can you tell them not to do that?
Please do not share your email addresses. Just as a safety precaution. We don't ever want everybody in the world to know what your email address is. I think it is our sexual desire to reproduce. That's ultimately our biggest enemy. Or is it our intelligence? What do you think? Yes. Yes, we're too smart for our own good, or I would say too clever for our own good, certainly not too wise for our own good. And as with every other species in the history of the planet, we are inclined to reproduce. Of course we are, because that's what ensures our continued existence, our continued success on this planet is reproducing. Of course we survive as long as we live. Of course, as I, I desire to stay alive and will work to stay alive for as long as there is habitat for humans on Earth. When our habitat disappears, that is our ability to grow food, because the rate of environmental change is outstripping our ability to keep up, then I won't say I'm happy to leave, but I'm willing to suffer for as little time as possible in the light of what comes next, which is not just potential bad behavior by humans, but the catastrophic meltdown of the world's 450 some nuclear power facilities. And due to the loss of aerosol masking, the rapid increase in global average temperature that precludes the ability of the organisms we need for our lives to persist themselves. So I'm going to hang in for what it's worth for as long as it's worth, and after a while it's not worth it anymore. I would love, Delana, for you all to combine your funds and write our Armageddon on Pauline's place in Belize, and if enough people agree to do that, I'll even share the property with you. Take that, Pauline. Kevin, what do you think the chances are of the psychopaths who own us? I love the play on George Carlin there. The psychopaths who own us launching some madcap geoengineering project, like deliberately creating a nuclear winter. It could happen. I think they know what you and I know, Kevin, and what a few other people know and are even willing to admit. And some moments I think that will be enough for them to not launch nuclear weapons. Other times I think they might just be willing to run that experiment because they know what's coming. I don't know. If it was me, I'd be reluctant to pull those levers. But I don't think I'm a sociopath. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Jenny wants to know what your favorite animal is.
Lyndon asks, you often mention pursuing right action regardless of the outcome. Can you or Pauline put a search engine suggestion for the ocean-based plan using a reflective surface to reflect heat? If you're referring to the MIR project, there is a website. Do you know what it is?
No.
Why don't you, can you look it up?
Yep.
Can you just type in MIR reflection, and I bet it'll show up, MEER reflection. So hopefully Pauline will find that website. Why aren't the wealthy using some of their wealth to support this? Money won't do them any good. I think because they don't know about it. There's a few corporate media publications lately pointing out various kinds of geoengineering, all of which are ridiculous and are doomed to fail, as nearly as I can tell. Many of them have been debunked since at least 2015, so more than 5 years, and still people are writing about them as if they're going to save us. I think that the word just hasn't gotten out about the project Ye Tao is heading at Harvard's Roland Institute. if it does get out, then I think people might throw some money into it, because it does indeed mean continued civilization, continued life on Earth, including life of humans on Earth. I think that it's just not getting out there. I asked Dr. Tao the other day if he would consider hiring a public relations company to get the word out. And he said they just don't have any money for it. So, if they don't have money to secure the services of a public relations company, then they certainly don't have $1 billion to launch the project, unfortunately. Running short on time here. We've been going for an hour so far. And you're right, Delana, running out of money in the US is the same as death. Scott writes, somewhere I heard that the recent tensions between India and China in the Himalayas are about control of glacier waters. Have you heard anything about this? No, I haven't, although very little surprises me.
I've heard of it.
You have heard of that?
Yeah.
How come I'm always the last to know? Is it because I left Facebook and Twitter? I bet that's it. So now I'm just clueless. So yeah, it could be that control of water coming from glaciers is what the recent tensions are about. What is the annual average rainfall in Belize? I don't know, and I looked at it in a bunch of different places. They don't keep very good track as a country. Oh, by the way, Pauline just posted under the Nature by Its Last moniker the Mere Reflection website, which is, oddly enough, merereflection.com. MEERREFLECTION.com. So mere spelled MEER and then reflection all run together.com. James, why are all the 450 plus nuclear power plants going to melt down at once? Not all at once, not simultaneously, but even first responders stop responding, stop going to work when a situation starts to potentially affect their family members. Then they just quit. They go home. They go to protect the ones they love instead of protecting and serving the people they're paid to protect and serve. So when money becomes worthless, as it will, then the nuclear power plants are going to melt down because nobody's going to go to work anymore. Would you? What would your priority be? So let's see. I can go into the nuclear power plant, me and maybe I can round up 5 other employees who will go there to try to keep the thing patched together to help it survive. But of course they all rely upon grid-tied power to begin with. So that's kind of a fool's errand. Maybe you can round up a half a dozen people to go in and try to keep the thing online while your family is out of food, while they're suffering at home. You're just going into work to try to save the world? I don't think that's going to happen. So it's not going to happen all in one day or all literally simultaneously, but I suspect it will happen over a relatively short period of time, municipality to municipality, as people don't have access to the things we take for granted now, like electricity and air conditioning when you live in a superheated place, or the ability to heat yourself when you live in a cold place. The ability to get food, the ability to maintain body temperature, the ability to get water, those are all really important to people. If you can't have those needs taken care of, then you're not going to desire a potential paycheck that is almost certain not to come and act on that desire by going into work anywhere, much less at a nuclear power plant. Okay, Jeremy says, is it possible you could go through together a quick cheat sheet on the facts? Example, when was aerosol masking discovered and by who? Who first discovered the temperature change? I would encourage you to go to guymcpherson.com and use the search box, and I've answered all of those questions 1,000 times.
I just shared the link to extinction, the foretold extinction ignored.
And Pauline just shared under the Nature by Its Last moniker the link to Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored. So that's a good 3,000 word place to start. Another good place for information is the 32,000 word essay posted atop the blog or on one of the tabs if you're on certain devices that's called Climate Change Summary and Update. It has hundreds of links that you can follow that will answer your question. There's no quick cheat sheet of the facts. There's my life's work, and my life's work cannot be organized into a quick cheat sheet. It's a life's work.
Maybe he can do it. Maybe he could put that stuff together and
But Jeremy,
a chart.
knock yourself out.
Yeah.
Put together that chart. I will post it on the blog and put your name on it.
Pretty awesome.
Will this climate disaster trigger World War II? World War III. Sorry, World War III has been underway for a long time. You just haven't noticed. And we really got a wrap here. We're at 5 minutes after the hour. Do I have any direct involvement with the MIR project? Yes. I'm involved in periodic conversations with Dr. Tao and the other people involved in the project. I'm not just the idea man, thankfully. Most people don't like any of the ideas I've had so far. How can we combat this particular version of stupidity? Good luck. I haven't been able to successfully combat much stupidity during my lifetime as a teacher. I realize you tried it once in New Mexico, perhaps another try with more forethought and planning. What do you think? Well, let's see. That time I spent 3 years looking for the place. I spent approximately 120 hours each week planning and implementing a well thought out procedure for long-term survival, and it failed catastrophically. What do I think? I think it's a great idea. Maybe it's just me. Maybe my behaviors, maybe my emotions are a poor match to getting along with other human beings. Don't weigh in.
Belize.
Don't weigh in on this, please, Polly.
But we did it in Belize too.
And we worked it for a while in Belize, and I would say it worked a lot better in Belize than it did in New Mexico for two reasons. One, in New Mexico, I depended strictly upon a gift economy, and so I lost bajillions of dollars as a result. And two, I assumed the role of a teacher way too frequently with more than 1,000 visitors, and that disrupted the life of the people who live there a little too much. So in Belize, we took a more hands-off approach, I would say, and simultaneously gave people responsibility for their actions while they were on the property. So maybe it could work, especially if I wasn't involved. And 2 more minutes?
Yes. And
2 more minutes. Let's wrap this up.
Coffee house, which is
Yeah,
just arrived.
right. Just in time to say goodbye. You know, Victoria, I have considered what you've mentioned. I've considered it for the last 18 years since I knew humans were on the verge of our extinction. So I have already thought about this for a very long time. I have approached it from a very scholarly perspective for longer than most people have thought about what they're going to do with their retirement funds or anything else in their lives. I have attempted living off-grid for a decade. I have made sacrifices that exceed those of the next 1,000 people I know. I don't think I'm going to do things a lot differently from this point. I see the consequences of my actions so far, and I'm not going to double down on what I view as a failed series of projects. Could we get a reminder a bit ahead of time of your live chats? I always get here by accident. I post it every single time 2 or 3 days in advance at guymcpherson.com. Please subscribe to guymcpherson.com, and then you'll know for sure when it's coming. In addition, Pauline posts it on the Nature Bass Last channel a day or two in advance every single time. So you might want to subscribe to the Nature Bass Last YouTube channel as well. So through either one of those approaches, I just mentioned the blog, either the blog
Facebook,
or
channel.
subscribing on YouTube, you can find it. We post it well in advance every time. There's no need for you to show up accidentally. There's plenty of reminders. Okay. And Victoria, if you want to hear more of my thoughts going forward, read all the work at guymcpherson.com. There's a lot there. I suspect if you start reading now and only take time to sleep and eat, that you won't have time to finish it before we're all dead. But maybe. So read some of my past work. You'll understand a little better why I'm not interested in pursuing the approach that you're interested in. I've been there. I've done that. I've tried it repeatedly. And it has not worked out well for me. What I'm doing now is working out well for me. So I'm going to stick to it. All right. Thank you, everybody. Any last words? What kind of thing was that to say? Last words, is that like last meal? Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll try to do this again in about a week. So pay attention to guymcpherson.com and the Nature Bass Last YouTube channel. Tune in, say, in 5, 6, and 7 days to see what's announced there.
Check your emails.
Check your email messages.
Could go into spam box.
All this stuff could be going to your spam box. Most of the email messages that I want to read goes to my spam or my trash, and the stuff I don't want to read goes directly in front of me to my inbox. So that's weird. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Look for us again in about a week, and
Stay safe and wear a mask.
make it a great week. You might even have control